All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for joining me in the class. I think it's very, very important that people are attending this class tonight because one of the greatest signs that a person is not addicted in an unhealthy way to something is when you have the ability to put it aside and to go to a Torah class. If a person is so involved with and drawn after something like, for example, the election, but the same thing could apply to a sports game or to something else going on. If a person is so drawn and connected to the election that it won't allow them to be able to come to a Torah class, especially when the election is not going to be decided during this Torah class, right? There's going to be plenty of time after the Torah class to decide the election. So the fact that you have come to the Torah class is a sign of being a very, very healthy person. So that's the message that I want to share with you right at the beginning. That all of those who are attending this class tonight, that is a sign that you are healthy people and are able to put things in perspective in the most wonderful way. So thank you again for joining. So I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, there were occasions where I watched the Olympics. And I got very, very jealous watching the Olympics because you would see a person compete in a particular sport and they won a gold medal at the age of 16. And they might announce that this person is the youngest person ever to win a gold medal in this, at this, and this age. And I would get very jealous because I was very athletic. I played a lot of sports. And I always wished that I could be the greatest at whatever sport or athletic thing that I was doing. And if I would be able to be the youngest person to ever win a gold medal in this particular thing, I wanted that. I really would have liked that. And when I became 17 or I became older than the people who are winning the Olympics, it was like, it's too late. I missed it. Even though I've never played that sport in the world. Figure skating was never my thing, but I'm too old, right? I was too old and I'd already be disappointed. This reflects, I think, the desire that people have. You want to do something that's important. You want to do something that makes a difference, right? You want to do something that it's not that you want to become famous necessarily, but people want to do something that matters. Right? I don't know if you have that feeling in life. I know I certainly do. And I think many people have this longing and a desire in life to achieve something that's truly valuable, meaningful, and important. Now, we all know that in our own lives, what we do is meaningful and it is valuable. It's valuable to our family, to our parents or to our children, right? To our siblings, to people's grandchildren, to the community. We all do good things. But sometimes we're just looking for something that's just a little bit more. So one of the topics we're going to talk about tonight is, can we bridge the gap between living a normal life and being extraordinary? How do we, living our life in a typical, normal fashion, not on the way to being gold medal winners necessarily, how do we introduce that feeling of accomplishment, of extraordinary achievements? How do we bring that into our life today? So that's the question. The answer is going to be the unique Hasidic perspective on the value, the importance, the prominence, and the power of doing a mitzvah. Now, who was the person who did the very first mitzvah? Now, this, of course, would be Avraham, because we consider Avraham to be the first Jew. But was Avraham really the first Jew? When did the Jews first become the Jewish people? This was at Mount Sinai. When did the Jewish people become a nation? When we were gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai and God gave us the Torah. Now, does that mean that Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel and Leah, that they were not Jewish? Does that mean Yehuda was not Jewish? Yosef wasn't Jewish? Levi was not Jewish? Based on the statement that the Jewish nation became the Jewish nation at Mount Sinai, that would seem to imply that the patriarchs and the matriarchs were not even Jewish. Can that be? So the truth is, this is really debated quite rigorously in Jewish history. There's a stream of rabbis that come down very solidly on the side that the patriarchs and the matriarchs absolutely were Jewish, and they bring proof texts to defend this position. However, there's a whole nother line of thought with a tremendous amount of rabbis who say that they were not Jewish, that you could not become Jewish until the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. And they bring all kinds of proofs to back up their position as well. In today's class, we're going to side with the theme that they absolutely were Jewish, and certainly intuitively, the Avos, right, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, and all their descendants prior to Matan Torah were full-fledged Jews, right? It's kind of very hard. It rubs you the wrong way a little bit to think Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov weren't Jewish. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, they weren't Jewish. Levi, Yosef, how could this be that they weren't Jewish? So we're going to go along with the perspective that they were Jewish. Now, if we're going to go along with the perspective that they were Jewish, then what happened at Mount Sinai? What is unique about the giving of the Torah? Because not only are we arguing that the patriarchs and the matriarchs were full-fledged Jews, but they actually already had the Torah and they already had mitzvahs. Look at here, text number 5. If you have a textbook, it would be on page 49. We're quoting the Talmud, Tractate Kiddushin 82a. The Talmud teaches us that Abraham, our forefather, fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given, as the verse states, because Abraham listened to my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Torah was such a part of Abraham's life, not only his life, but his whole family and those that surrounded him and were connected to him, that they actually had yeshivas. Reb Chama, the son of Reb Chanina, said, from the first days of our forefathers, they were never left without a yeshiva. So it's not only Sender Edelman who travels to Little Rock, Arkansas to be able to study in yeshiva, but even Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, their children, their grandchildren, the extended family, and again, those who were influenced by Avraham and his family, they studied Torah, they observed all of the mitzvahs, and they were fully immersed in Torah and actually attended yeshivas. So again, if this is the case, they were full-fledged Jews, they had Torah, they had mitzvahs, and they had yeshivas. What happened at Sinai? Now, it could be they did not have kosher Chinese restaurants, right? It is possible that they did not have that until after the Torah was given. But on a practical level, what did Mount Sinai accomplish? Now, you could argue that what was the accomplishment of Mount Sinai? It was mass revelation. Every single Jew, man, woman, and child experienced the revelation of God. It was as concrete and as tangible as the computer screen or the phone that you're using to listen to this class right now. So what was unique about Mount Sinai? Mass revelation, the tangible experience of God himself. Now, certainly that's true, and it's a valuable part of Mount Sinai experience. The technical name, the technical term to describe the Mount Sinai experience is Matan Torah. It is the celebration of the giving of the Torah. Shavuos is the holiday that marks the giving of the Torah, and the way that we commemorate it in the Amidah when we pray is we call it Zman Matan Torah Seinu. Shavuos is the time of the giving of the Torah. But does this make any sense? Avraham had the Torah, Avraham had the mitzvahs, Avraham had the yeshiva, Avraham was a full-fledged Jew. So what does it mean that at Mount Sinai the Jewish people were given the Torah when clearly they had the Torah in a very full way, in a very practical way for hundreds of years beforehand? So the main difference between before Mount Sinai and after Mount Sinai is whether Torah and mitzvahs were obligatory or voluntary. Before Mount Sinai, it was optional. It was your choice whether you wanted to introduce into your life the study of Torah than the performance of mitzvahs. After the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, now we were commanded to observe the Torah. It became our obligation, our responsibility, and a duty. We had absolutely no choice in the matter. Now I ask you, from your perspective, what is greater and what is better? A person who chooses to observe Torah and mitzvahs voluntarily, without any obligation, without any command, it's their choice. Or a person who observes Torah and mitzvahs because they were commanded to do it, they're obligated to do it, and they have no choice. Look what text number 7 says. Text number 7, again from the Talmud Tractate Kedushin, it says, greater is the one who is commanded to do a mitzvah and performs it than one who is not commanded to do a mitzvah and performs it. So a person who has no command at all, yet voluntarily chooses to do that act, the Talmud says is not as great as the person who is commanded to do it and does the act. What does Sinai represent? Sinai represents the moment that we were commanded and it became an obligation, a responsibility, and a duty. But now I'm sure all of you are thinking the exact same question. Why? Why is doing something because you're commanded to do it, you're obligated to do it, you have no choice but to do it, so valued and so precious? You have to do it. You don't have a choice. Isn't it more precious and more valuable when somebody does something when they're not commanded to do it, when they're not obligated to do it? Imagine this scenario, right? Your child cleans up his room without even having to be asked. Isn't that so much more special when you say, my child cleaned up the room without even having to be asked? If I made him do it, if I laid down the law and he did it, what kind of accomplishment is that? Imagine your spouse washed all the dishes, did all the laundry without even being asked. They saw that the sink was full of dishes. They went over there, they washed them up. Wouldn't that be more precious and valuable to you that a person did it voluntarily, that a person did it out of their own choice, as opposed to a person who is forced and obligated, they have to do it because they're commanded to do it? Even more, think about what it means that Avraham, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, observed Torah mitzvahs without him being commanded. What era did they live in? They lived in the most pagan of eras. They literally lived in a world of human sacrifice. That was the dominant theme, that was the dominant religious modality of the day. To be monotheistic did not risk your life in theory, but you were putting your life on the line in reality. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they had multiple encounters with death as a result of the fact that they're committed to Torah and mitzvahs and their relationship with God. So the fact that they chose voluntarily to observe Torah and mitzvahs at a time where their life was literally on the line, in the most pagan of atmospheres and environments, this was a true credit to them. They should be valued, they should be praised. Yet the Talmud says, better is the person who does a mitzvah because they were commanded to do it than the person who chose. It seems counterintuitive that an instructed act is better than a voluntary one. Isn't initiative, isn't choosing on your own something which is more exceptional? Now, before we actually answer the question, we need to understand what it means that they studied Torah and they did mitzvahs. And this understanding itself will be the key to answering our question. All right, let's go to text number 8. How did our ancestors perform the mitzvahs? Tefillin, for example, contained parchment scrolls recounting the miracles and stories of the Exodus from Egypt. How then could they have worn tefillin when the Exodus had yet to occur? This is a phenomenal question. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to wear tefillin. How could Avraham have worn tefillin? The mitzvah of wearing tefillin includes 4 parchments from the Torah that describe the exodus of Egypt. But the exodus of Egypt never happened yet. It means those parchments cannot possibly exist. So how on earth could Avraham have worn tefillin? The same can be asked of the mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach and live in a sukkah on Sukkot, which respectively commemorates our hasty departure from Egypt and the huts we later dwelled in while traveling the desert. How would it be possible for these acts to be performed before the events they commemorate? These things didn't even happen yet. So if Avraham wanted to observe Pesach, Pesach didn't happen. It's not a thing. There's no such thing called Pesach. There's no such thing called matzah. How could Avraham do it? Therefore, we are compelled to say that their Torah study and mitzvah performance were not focused on the material. Instead, they aimed to connect spiritually and emotionally to God. They performed each specific mitzvah to bond with God in each unique way. The mitzvah of tefillin, for example, represents the quest to live according to the dictates of the mind while taming the temptations of the heart. So laying tefillin for our ancestors meant attaining its spiritual significance. Any accompanying physical act was only to express the specific mitzvah endeavor they were working on and experiencing. So here the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe of Chabad, explained to us quite beautifully what it was like to observe mitzvahs before the Torah was given. There was no physical object for a Jew to be able to perform the mitzvah. There was no matzah, and there was no tefillin. Certainly there was no tefillin. Matzah is a little bit easier because you just need to bake a little bread. But the tefillin physically could not exist at that time. How did they observe the mitzvah of tefillin? Every mitzvah has an inner meaning. Every mitzvah has a spiritual counterpart. Every mitzvah has a spiritual goal that you're trying to accomplish through the fulfillment of that mitzvah. And that is what they had. So he gives the example of the mitzvah of tefillin. Tefillin is put on your head. Tefillin is put on your heart. The straps go down your arms. What is it meant to do? It's meant to say the mind controls the heart, which leads to righteous action. That is the inner meaning of the mitzvah of tefillin. And that is what Avraham had, and Yitzchak had, and Yaakov had, and even Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah had. When they contemplated, when they meditated on this idea, they tried to connect to God through the vehicle of utilizing their mind to control their emotions and to lead to righteous action. For them, that was what putting on tefillin meant, not the physical action of black leather boxes, which they did not have. And the same principle would apply to all of the mitzvahs that they observed. The Torah actually gives us an example of Yaakov putting on tefillin. You may remember in the Torah portion, I believe it is Vayetze, I could be wrong, but I believe it's Vayetze, where Yaakov is trying to get his sheep to produce, his flock to produce sheep that are spotted and have flecks and things like that. So he takes a bunch of sticks and he cuts lines into them. The Talmud comments that what was Yaakov doing? This was Yaakov's version of putting on tefillin. He did not have black leather boxes with parchment inside. Rather, what did he do? He focused on the idea of subjugating your mind and your heart in direction towards God, and he utilized the physical objects of the stick in order to help connect him and get him in the mode of doing the mitzvah. So we even have an example in the Torah. Here we have a quote here from the Rebbe, Toras Menachem, volume 29. The physical act, however, was beside the point for them. Instead, because they were solely dedicated to God, our forefathers' entire beings were thoroughly permeated by the powerful connection they were experiencing. Even their bodily limbs expressed what was going on inside. Thus, the patriarchs are described as God's chariots. This means that the patriarchs were truly spiritual people. They were so in tune with what it was God wanted. It wasn't a physical act that they had to perform. Rather, it was aligning their mind, their heart, and their soul with God. It follows that their spiritual endeavors found expression in physical matter as well, but such material expression was not the point. So while there was always some material manifestation of each spiritual journey, the physical component of their mitzvahs remained a distant second to the lofty intent behind it. Using the sticks example, there indeed was a material expression of the spiritual mitzvah of tefillin, the sticks. Yet to Jacob, the physical dimension and characteristics of those sticks were of no importance. So the service for the patriarchs was completely spiritual. The mitzvahs were 613 emotional pathways to connect to God. So what we see from here is that the observance of mitzvahs before the Torah was given and after the Torah was given was radically, radically different. The object with which the mitzvah was performed before the giving of the Torah was not important, was not relevant, was not critical, and had no significance. The importance and the value of doing a mitzvah before the Torah was given was the spiritual experience that was a result of that mitzvah. After the giving of the Torah, the main event, the main focal point, is the physical object which we do the mitzvah. And tefillin, again, is the perfect example. If the tefillin that you're using are not kosher, it doesn't matter where your mind was, it doesn't matter where your heart was, you accomplished nothing, zero, zilch, when it comes to that mitzvah. Tefillin has rules and regulations. The parchment has to be made in a certain way. It has to be written in a certain way. The boxes have to be leather and perfectly square and black. The straps have to be a certain width. If any of those details is off, it's not tefillin and you didn't do the mitzvah. Before the Torah was given, it was solely, entirely, wholly a spiritual experience. After the Torah was given, the physical object and component became critical and primary. Before the Torah was given, the physical object had no holiness to it. Yaakov could put on tefillin, so to speak, with the sticks, and afterwards toss them away, throw them away. There was no sanctity. Today, we put on tefillin. The tefillin is holy. The tefillin is godly. We have to treat it in a certain way. It becomes an absolutely holy object. But it's not only the tefillin themselves. Even objects that are auxiliary, secondary, that are used with the holy object, even becomes holy itself. Check this text out. Text number 11 from the Code of Jewish Law. Articles of holiness, such as the container of a Torah scroll, a mezuzah case, tefillin straps, a box into which they put a Torah scroll or a single book of the Torah, a chair upon which they put a Torah scroll, and a curtain that they hang in front of the Holy Ark are considered sacred and require burial when no longer able to be used. What this means is, at the shul, we had a tent. In the tent, we had a table that we read the Torah from. In the tent, we had a portable Aron Kodesh that we put together. Those things are holy and sacred forever. Why? Because they were used for the purposes of a mitzvah. Even though the table is not a mitzvah, the ark is not a mitzvah. But once something was used for the purposes of a mitzvah, it maintains a holiness and a sanctity. We cannot throw it in the garbage. It has to be buried exactly the same way that you would bury a Torah scroll. So after the Torah was given, the physical objects themselves become imbued with sanctity and holiness. Before the Torah was given, they do not. It was completely spiritual focus. Now I ask you the question, what makes more sense to you? Does it make more sense, the version of Judaism before the Torah was given, where the main thing was the mind, the heart, the soul, as it related to that particular mitzvah, or the post-Sinai experience, where we are obsessed and focused on the particular details of the tefillin, the black and the leather and all that stuff, whether the spiritual component is there is not as important. Which one makes more sense to you? I would argue, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Henry, you want to share something?
So what you're telling me is, while they were in the land of Mitzrayim, they were going through all these things with the twigs and the sticks and doing tefillin their way. And then after Hashem had them walk around for 40 years and said that you're going to do this way, wouldn't that be more spiritual? Actually, it would probably be more spiritual if I think about it the other way, because they were using their soul, they were using their mind. Here it's just like props.
Exactly.
They had to be given these things in order to perform the mitzvahs. Before, when they were in Mitzrayim, it's their heads were in a better place, actually, than, because they were doing things on their own. They were doing things what they were spiritually supposed to do.
Henry hit the nail on the head. Hit the nail on the head. You could make a tremendously strong argument that before the Torah was given, there was only one way to do a mitzvah, and that was you had to invest your heart and soul and mind into it. It was a completely spiritually transformative experience. After the Torah was given, all you need to do a mitzvah is check the box off of the physical requirements. Yeah. You make the blessing, you eat the food, you tie it on. Is the spiritual component wonderful? Yes, you should, absolutely. It's great if you do that. But it's not a requirement. Before the Torah was given, the definition of a mitzvah was mind, heart, soul, total spiritual experience. After the Torah was given, we have a new definition for a mitzvah. It's using a specific physical object in this specific way and saying those specific words. Mind, heart, soul appear to be optional. So what's the logic of using ethereal spirituality to transform mere earthly matters? So you're going to argue before the Torah was given, we couldn't have a holy object. Now that the Torah is given, you know what, Mitchell? Tefillin is holy. How exciting is that? A black leather box with a square and straps, those things are holy. Wow, right? Now, it is pretty cool that there's something that's holy versus not holy, but how earth-shattering is it that that physical box over there becomes holy when you're kind of lacking the whole mind, heart, and soul component to it? Yet, what does the Talmud say? The Talmud says that those who are commanded to do a mitzvah are better than those who did it without being commanded. The post-Sinai experience is on a higher level than the pre-Sinai experience. How could that be? Why is that the case? How could it be that our mitzvahs are better? So the answer is that the patriarchs and the matriarchs, they truly reached the pinnacle, the epitome of what a human being is able to accomplish. They really, truly uncovered the core and the essence of the Torah before it was commanded. They really were in tune with God on the most spiritual level, the highest that a human being can possibly achieve. Yet, our commandments are worth more. Why? Text number 12. This is from the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Lowy. He says the key difference is in the motivation for the performance. When you are commanded to perform a specific act and you comply, the behavior is then attributed to its cause, the command. Conversely, when you perform the same act, but purely of your own volition, then the reason for your behavior can only be attributed to yourself, the one performing the act. So the Gemara says, the identity of the person doing the mitzvah changes based on whether you are commanded to or not. A person who is not commanded to do it, why are they doing the mitzvah? Because I want to. That means who is doing the mitzvah? What's the nature? What's the flavor of the mitzvah? The I, the self, the person. When a person does a mitzvah because God commanded you to do the mitzvah, why are you doing the mitzvah? Because Hashem said so. So the nature of the mitzvah becomes totally different. Before Sinai, when they were not commanded, the mitzvah was an I statement, albeit a very positive one. After Sinai, when God commanded the Torah and mitzvahs, the mitzvahs became a God statement, not an I statement. So let's unpack this idea, try to understand it on a little bit of a deeper level. So human beings, in order to be able to reach their potential, it requires a lot of work. You have to invest time, you have to invest energy, you have to invest your mind, you have to invest your heart, you have to learn, you have to study, you have to meditate, you have to practice discipline. You have to sacrifice things that might bring you pleasure. You might have to sacrifice things that might bring you comfort in the pursuit of a higher goal. When you do so, you might actually become spiritually sensitive, mystically sensitive, and quite in tune with spirituality. And this is who and what the patriarchs were. They risked everything, they sacrificed everything to plug themselves in and be on one page with spirituality, godliness, holiness, and all that which is mystical and holy. However, they hit a ceiling. The patriarchs and the matriarchs hit a ceiling. There's only so high that you can go. There's only so far that a human being can reach, even utilizing all your potentials. A human being is limited. A human being is finite. A human being is a product of the world. Therefore, a human being cannot pierce the physical world to enter and penetrate into the spiritual. It's simply not possible. Text number 13 from the Rebbe. Many sources point to the fact that Abraham fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given. Yet though he certainly attained a high degree of holiness, he only reached as high as a limited creature can reach. Meaning to say, without a command from God, which is essentially divine empowerment, man cannot surpass his source. And as much as Abraham was the motivating power behind whatever he achieved, he was on his own. He was naturally unable to transcend himself. So Abraham went as far and as high as a person of the earth can go, but he could not reach heaven because a product of the earth is incapable of reaching the heaven because it's a different product, it's a different material, it's a different realm. There is simply no way to penetrate. However, when God gave us the Torah, now he commanded us to do the mitzvahs. God was extending his hands from the heavens to the earth. Before giving the Torah, anything that we did was a product of our earthly existence, couldn't pierce the heaven. The giving of the Torah was God extending his hand from heaven to earth and allowing us to rise above the earth and to pierce the heaven and to fuse and unify. The finite was able to grasp and to touch the infinite. Before Sinai, a mitzvah was a powerful expression of the spirituality of you. After Sinai, a mitzvah is the most powerful expression of God. And it allows you and the world to become transformed and to become holy. This is something which cannot be done on your own. So this leads us to another question. If the mitzvahs that we do today, post-Sinai, are so superior to the pre-Sinai experience, Does that mean that the spiritual lives of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, Yosef, Yehuda, Levi, all the greats, were they inferior? Did they lead some type of spiritually inferior existence? Chas v'shalom, God forbid, we would never say such a thing, although it certainly was different. We attribute ourselves, we call ourselves, we describe ourselves, the B'nai Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the B'nai Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We are the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. How do we pray? We say, Elokeinu Elokevaseinu, God, the God of our fathers. When we make a Meshaberach, we say Meshaberach, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo. We mention Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo are after signing. But we mention, of course, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Why do we do it? Because they are our inspiration. They are our role models. They are people who, even when they were not commanded, gave up everything in their life to connect to God on the deepest and truest possible way. There was, however, one exception. There is one exception where even the patriarchs did line up with a post-Sinai experience. There was one mitzvah that they observed that we don't have any advantage over them. And that is the mitzvah of circumcision, the mitzvah of having a bris. Text 15 here we have from the Rebbe. Moreover, the notion of physical impact is built into the properties of the mitzvah of Milah. God told Avraham that my covenant will be in your flesh, meaning that the ultimate bond with God, a covenant would be embedded in Avraham's corporeal flesh. So number one, Avraham was actually commanded to do this mitzvah. And number two, it was in his flesh. That means physically, the object, his existence became holy as opposed to in any other mitzvah. When Avram was commanded by God to circumcise himself, he then became able to transcend his human self and connect with his creator. By performing the mitzvah, he became one with God, who had just commanded him to perform this act. So even the patriarchs and the matriarchs, true, they were before Sinai, nevertheless, they did have a taste of this post-Sinai experience. One of the places where we see the depth of this is when Eliezer is being sent on a mission by Avraham. And Avraham wants him to swear. Now, how does a person make an oath? When the next president of the United States is going to be sworn in, whoever he is going to take that oath on a Bible. You take the oath on something which is holy. Before the Torah was given, there were no Bibles, there were no things that are holy. So what does Avram tell Eliezer to do? He says, Eliezer, put your hand on my thigh. What is that a euphemism for? The bris, the place of the circumcision, because that was the only physical object and item that had sanctity, that had holiness of a mitzvah. In that bris, heaven and earth merged, the finite and the infinite became one, and that was the holy object which he took an oath on. One of the things that we see from this story is, why did Avraham wait till he was 99 years old to do the mitzvah of having a bris? Tefillin he did before. Matzah he did before. Why? Because the mitzvah of a bris is unique, and that it actually transforms the physical flesh to be something that's holy. Before Sinai, that wasn't relevant to any other physical objects. So he did them. But because a bris literally meant the fusion in your own flesh of unity, oneness, holiness with God, he waited till he was 99 years old, till God actually commanded him to do it. And in that way, he was able to merge and bring heaven down to earth. All right, so what's the message from all of this, right? What is the lesson that we need to learn, and how could we apply it to the opening sessions of the class about doing something that is truly meaningful and doing something important? The answer is, you want to do something that's truly meaningful. You want to do something that's important. You want to do something that reaches not just the pinnacle of human achievement, not just the maximum of what a human being wants to accomplish, but we have the ability to penetrate heaven itself and bring heaven down to earth. We have the ability to merge and to unite the finite and the infinite. And that itself fulfills the purpose of creation. We could transcend our own limited existence. We can rise above. How do we get there? By learning from Abraham. Abraham was a person who lived 99 years of absolute spiritual perfection. His mind, his heart, his soul, his actions, his behaviors were as good as a human being can possibly achieve. He faced obstacles, he faced challenges, and he overcame them all. Yet he reached the ceiling. He reached the ceiling. He recognized and he understood that I have not achieved all that I can achieve. And even at the age of 99, he was willing to get a bris. So what we have to learn from this is that in life, when we do our part, if we maximize our effort, then just as Abraham, who maximized his effort and merited the mitzvah of having a bris, and merited the actual revelation of God himself, which is the first words of this parsha, that God appeared to Abraham, we can experience that as well. Text number 17, again from the Rebbe. You should never be satisfied with what you've accomplished, no matter how great the accomplishment is. Learn from Abraham. Even after God appeared to him in what the Zohar calls a vista, he did not take that to mean that he arrived. As long as you aren't entirely one with God, there is still room to add and grow spiritually. On the other hand, if you do the most you possibly can, you are guaranteed to be gifted with unbounded growth. Not only will God appear to you through a vista, but you'll be able to see the divine clearly, as indicated in the name of the parsha Vayera, and God appeared just as it was with Abraham. So we have to recognize and appreciate that what we do has the ultimate value. It is the ultimate importance, and we're making a huge difference. And never be satisfied with what we're doing, because when we maximize our efforts, God responds in kind as well, and will feel and see the presence of God in our life in an absolutely tremendous way. So the bottom line is, push yourself to be the best vessel that you can, and God will shower you with unearned blessings. Go ahead and be awesome. A beautiful message from this week's Torah portion. Tomorrow night, Wednesday, 7:30, we begin our new 6-session course, Secrets of the Bible, Iconic Stories, Mystical Meanings, and Their Lessons for Life. We're looking at 6 stories spread throughout the Torah. These are the stories that are the most fundamental and foundational stories within Judaism. There's so much to it. The first class tomorrow night, story 1, the Tree of Knowledge. Again, this is the story that started it all. We began in the Garden of Eden, and we were expelled. All of life, culminating in tonight's election, is a product of eating that fruit of the Tree of Knowledge. What is it all about? What's happening? What's going on? They're fighting over a fruit. You can't eat it. You can't eat it. What's the big deal? And why do we have all these consequences? Tomorrow night at 7:30, please share it with your friends. Tell your friends. It's going to be a phenomenal course. Come and check it out. All right. Any questions, comments before we go?
Betsy, if I want to get the book for this course, can I get it at the shul?
Yes. So everyone who signed up, we put the book with your name in it in a box outside the porch.
He's talking
Sorry?
I'm talking about the course, the thing we're doing tonight.
Oh, tonight, yes. I have one at the shul. Yes, you can get one at the shul.
Okay.
Right now, they're in the lobby. They're on that thing there, whatever you call that, the display case. They're on the display case. You could go in and pick one up.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Mitchell.
And